I am Ariana, 32, a professional photographer based in Seattle with a studio that I fought hard to build. When my phone rang at 2 in the morning and I saw my estranged father's name on the screen, I knew it wasn't good news. But I never expected him to calmly say, "Your apartment building is on fire. Hope you have insurance." What shocked him more than the fire was my laughter. He couldn't understand why I was laughing at such a tragedy. What he didn't know was that my laughter had everything to do with the secrets he'd been keeping all these years. If you're watching this from your own place that feels like a real home, unlike what I grew up with, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want to hear how I finally stood up to the man who thought money could fix everything. My childhood memories with my father Robert are sparse and hollow. He was physically present in our house, but mentally he always seemed to be in his office downtown closing another real estate deal. My earliest memories of him involve seeing the back of his head as he hunched over paperwork at the dining table, his cell phone constantly ringing with important calls. When I would approach him with a drawing or a question, his standard response was a distracted, "Not now, Ariana, Daddy's busy making money for us." My mother Lisa tried her best to fill the emotional void my father left in our home. She attended every school play, helped with every science project, and cheered at every soccer game. But behind her supportive smile, I could see her struggling with her own depression. "Your father loves us," she would insist after he missed yet another family dinner. "He just shows it differently by providing for us." As a child, I wanted to believe her, but even then I knew the difference between provision and presence. When I turned 8, I begged for a real camera for my birthday. Photography had already become my escape, a way to capture and make sense of the world around me. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, the birthday cake's candles flickering, waiting for my father to arrive. My mother kept checking her watch, making excuses. "Traffic must be bad," or "He's probably picking up your gift." 3 hours later, when he finally walked through the door, the candles had been blown out the cake, mostly eaten. He brought an expensive camera, far too advanced for an 8-year-old with a hastily attached bow. "Sorry, princess, big closing today. But look what Daddy bought you." The camera felt cold in my hands. For my 10th birthday, he missed it completely. For my 12th, he showed up for 15 minutes. By my 13th birthday, I stopped expecting him to come at all. The real estate market was booming in the early 2000s, and my father's business expanded rapidly. He bought a bigger house, fancier cars, designer clothes for my mother. Material comforts flowed into our lives, but emotional connection ebbed away. I started referring to our house as the showcase because it never felt like a home, just a place to display my father's success. When I was 14, my mother finally reached her breaking point. I came home from school one day to find her crying at the kitchen table, divorce papers spread out in front of her. "I can't do this anymore, Ariana," she whispered. "I'm disappearing in this marriage." The divorce was ugly. My father fought not for custody of me, but for possession of the house and his other assets. When the judge asked me who I wanted to live with, my father looked surprised, as if he hadn't considered that I might choose my mother. We moved into a small apartment across town, and my father's financial support came with strings attached. "I'm paying for your education, your clothes, your food," he would remind me during our court-mandated visitations. "The least you could do is be grateful." My mother got a job as a receptionist at a dental office, and I started working weekends at a local coffee shop when I turned 16. Every dollar I earned felt like a step away from my father's control. Photography became more than a hobby during these years. It became my voice, my way of showing the world as I saw it, not as my father insisted it was. The final breaking point came at my high school graduation. I was giving the valedictorian speech, an achievement my mother had helped me prepare for, with late-night study sessions and endless encouragement. I scanned the audience before stepping up to the podium, hoping against hope to see my father's face. My mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride, but the seat she had saved beside her remained empty. Later that night, my father called. "Big deal in Phoenix, couldn't get out of it. I'll make it up to you. How about a trip to Europe this summer?" I declined the offer. Money couldn't buy back the moment he had missed. After graduation, our relationship deteriorated into occasional financial transactions and obligatory holiday calls. He would send checks for textbooks or rent, and I would send formal thank you notes in return. On Christmas and Thanksgiving, we would exchange carefully scripted pleasantries over the phone. "How's school?" he would ask. Fine, I would answer, neither of us trying to bridge the chasm between us. Despite his disapproval, I pursued photography professionally. There's no money in that, Ariana. Be practical, he advised when I told him my college plans. I enrolled in the art program at the University of Washington anyway, determined to build a life on my own terms, not his. Our conversations grew even more infrequent after that decision reduced to birthday calls and the occasional emergency. What my father never understood was that his absence taught me something valuable: self-reliance. If I couldn't count on him emotionally, I would learn not to need anyone that way. This mindset would serve me well in the years to come, but it would also be challenged in ways I never expected. College became my sanctuary, a place where no one knew me as Robert's daughter, but simply as Ariana, the girl with the camera always hanging around her neck. I took every photography class available and spent hours in the darkroom, developing not just my photos, but my identity. To cover tuition and living expenses, I juggled 3 jobs: barista in the morning, campus bookstore clerk in the afternoon, and waitress on weekends. Each paycheck was a small victory, proof that I didn't need my father's money to survive. During sophomore year, I met Jasmine in a digital photography class. She had vibrant blue hair, an infectious laugh, and a talent for capturing the most authentic moments of human emotion in her photographs. We bonded over our shared love for documentary photography and our complicated family histories. Jasmine had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes until she aged out of the system. "At least your dad sends money," she joked one night as we compared our stories over cheap wine in our dorm room. "Mine just sends cops looking for him about his unpaid child support." "Money isn't love," I replied, a mantra I had repeated to myself since childhood. "No, but it pays for ramen noodles, which keeps us alive to find love elsewhere," Jasmine pointed out pragmatically. After graduation with our newly minted art degrees, Jasmine and I decided to become roommates to save on expenses while building our photography portfolios. We searched for weeks before finding an affordable 2-bedroom apartment in an older building in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. The Westlake apartments weren't fancy, but with exposed brick walls and large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light, it felt like the perfect space for 2 aspiring photographers. The day we signed the lease was the first time I felt like a real adult. The apartment manager, a thin man named Patrick with slicked back hair and a permanent smirk, handed us the keys with minimal enthusiasm. "Welcome to Westlake. Rents due on the first, no exceptions. Building's old, so don't expect luxury." We didn't care about luxury. We cared about having a place that was ours. We spent that first weekend painting the walls, hanging our photographs, and arranging secondhand furniture scored from thrift stores and sidewalk-free piles. My father called while we were in the middle of assembling a bookshelf. "I could have helped you with the security deposit, Ariana," he said, sounding vaguely offended that I hadn't asked. "I've got it covered, Dad," I replied, exchanging a knowing glance with Jasmine, who was silently mimicking a phone with her hand and rolling her eyes. "The place is great, very artistic." "Well, if you change your mind about this starving artist phase, let me know. My friend's advertising agency is always looking for graphic designers." I ended the call quickly and turned back to the bookshelf, to something I could actually fix with my own hands. Over the next year, Jasmine and I built our careers inch by inch. I landed a job as an assistant to a commercial photographer, learning the business side of the industry while taking freelance gigs on the side. Jasmine worked at a portrait studio during the day and bartended at night. Our living room became our shared studio space, with backdrops hanging from the ceiling and lighting equipment tucked into every available corner. Our first warning sign about the building came about 6 months after we moved in. I woke up one morning to find water dripping from a brown stain in my bedroom ceiling. I called the emergency maintenance number listed in our lease, but no one answered. When I finally reached Patrick later that day, his response was underwhelming. "Yeah, the guy in 412 probably overflowed his tub again. I'll send someone to look at it when I can." 3 days later, a maintenance worker showed up, slapped some putty and paint on my ceiling, and left without addressing the actual leak. Within 2 weeks, the stain was back, larger than before. Around the same time, we started noticing other issues: flickering lights in the hallways, an elevator that frequently got stuck between floors, and a persistent smell of mold in the laundry room. Our neighbors, mostly artists, students, and young professionals attracted by the affordable rent, began comparing notes about maintenance problems. Elena, a graphic designer from apartment 315, organized an informal gathering in the building's shabby community room. About 20 residents showed up, each with their own story of neglect. The building had changed management companies 3 times in the past 5 years, and each transition had resulted in fewer repairs and more ignored complaints. "My bathroom floor is literally sinking," said Marcus, a music teacher from the second floor. "I think there's structural damage they're ignoring." "The fire alarm in my hallway has been chirping for months," added Taylor, a nurse who lived on the top floor. "I've reported it 6 times." As a photographer, I was trained to document reality, so I started keeping a visual record of the building's deterioration. Cracked ceiling beams exposed, wiring broken, smoke detectors, leaking pipes. My collection of images grew alarmingly fast. When I showed the photos to Patrick, hoping the visual evidence would spur action, he laughed dismissively. "Every old building has quirks. If you want perfect, go pay triple the rent somewhere else." His response bothered me enough that I decided to do some research on the building's ownership. The management company, Westlake Properties LLC, had a bare-bones website with no information about its leadership. The company address listed on our lease led to a post office box in a suburb north of Seattle. One evening, while editing photos for a client, I received a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be a potential client, I answered promptly. "Is this Ariana Montgomery?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "This is Lydia from Evergreen Realty. I'm calling about your recent inquiry regarding Westlake Properties." I hadn't made any such inquiry, but curiosity prompted me to play along. "Yes, thank you for getting back to me. I'm afraid I can't provide much information. Westlake Properties is a subsidiary of North Star Development Group, and they prefer to maintain privacy regarding their holdings." The name North Star triggered a distant memory. I thanked Lydia and ended the call, then immediately started searching online for North Star Development Group. The company's website featured a familiar face in its leadership section, Thomas Wright, my father's longtime business associate and golf buddy. I sat back in my chair, a chill running through me despite the summer heat filtering through our apartment windows. This couldn't be a coincidence. Did my father know about the connection? Was this why he never objected to my living in this particular building? I debated whether to call him, but decided against it. Our fragile relationship couldn't bear the weight of my suspicions, especially if they proved unfounded. Instead, I continued documenting the building's issues and started researching tenant rights in Seattle. If there was a connection to my father, I would find it through facts, not accusations. That night, as Jasmine and I shared takeout dinner on our tiny balcony overlooking the city lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that the building's problems were about to become much more personal than a leaky ceiling. Over the next 6 months, the conditions at Westlake Apartments went from concerning to alarming. Water damage spread across ceilings like dark continents on a map. The electrical system became increasingly erratic, with power surging unexpectedly, causing several residents to lose computers and other electronics. Most worrisome of all, the fire alarm system seemed to have given up entirely, no longer even making the half-hearted chirping that had annoyed residents before. I continued documenting everything with my camera, creating a visual timeline of neglect. One rainy Tuesday in November, I was photographing a newly formed crack in the stairwell wall when Elena from 315 spotted me. "You should see my bathroom now," she said, shaking her head. "The floor has sunk another inch, and black mold is growing along the baseboards. My allergies are going crazy." "Have you reported it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Multiple times. Patrick doesn't even pretend to write it down anymore." She leaned against the wall, careful to avoid the crack. "What are you doing with all these photos anyway?" "Evidence," I replied. "I think we need to organize and take collective action." 2 days later, I posted flyers around the building inviting everyone to a tenant meeting in my apartment. Jasmine baked cookies, and I prepared a presentation of my photographs organized by category: structural issues, electrical hazards, plumbing failures, and fire safety concerns. 23 residents squeezed into our apartment that Saturday afternoon. Some brought their own documentation, emails to management with no response, certified letters, returned unopened recordings of phone calls with Patrick and other Westlake representatives. "I think we need to go above the management company," I suggested after everyone had shared their experiences. The city has housing codes and inspection offices for exactly these kinds of situations. Marcus raised his hand. I tried that last year. Filed a complaint with the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections. An inspector came out, walked around with Patrick for 20 minutes and left. Nothing changed. Then we need better evidence and more pressure, I said, displaying some of my photos on our TV screen. I've organized everything by code violation based on the city's housing standards. We need to file multiple complaints from multiple residents. We formed a tenant committee that day with 5 of us taking the lead: myself, Elena, Marcus Taylor, and Jasmine. Over the next week, we helped each resident document their specific issues and file formal complaints with the city. I compiled all my photographs into a comprehensive report and submitted it through the city's online portal, requesting an urgent inspection due to potential fire hazards. The response from Westlake Properties was swift and hostile. Patrick appeared at my door the following Monday, his usually smug expression replaced by barely controlled anger. "You're causing trouble, Miss Montgomery," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The management company doesn't appreciate tenants who try to stir up problems." "We're not stirring up problems," I countered. "We're reporting legitimate safety concerns that you've repeatedly ignored." He handed me an envelope. "Consider this your official warning. Any further actions against the property owner could result in eviction proceedings." Inside the envelope was a letter on Westlake Properties' letterhead, claiming I had violated the terms of my lease by conducting unauthorized meetings and creating a hostile environment. The threat was clear, but it only strengthened my resolve. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called my father. The call went to voicemail. "Dad, it's Ariana. I need to talk to you about Westlake Properties and their connection to Thomas Wright. Please call me back. It's important." He didn't return my call. With the management company now openly hostile, I decided to dig deeper into the ownership structure of the building. A friend from college who now worked at a law firm helped me navigate through public records. What we found was a labyrinth of shell companies, each owned by another, making it nearly impossible to identify the actual owner of the building. One name kept appearing in the documentation, though: North Star Development Group, the company Thomas Wright was affiliated with. And buried in an attachment to a tax filing from 3 years earlier was another familiar name: Montgomery Investments, my father's company, listed as a minority stakeholder in the property. The discovery left me nauseous. Had my father knowingly allowed me to live in a building he partially owned, a building he knew was dangerous? Had he been receiving reports about the conditions all along? The thought was almost too painful to consider. Jasmine found me staring at the documents late that night, my eyes red from staring at the screen. "You need to get some sleep, Ari," she said gently. "This isn't going to be solved tonight." "My father owns part of this building, Jas," I said, my voice hollow. "He has to know about the conditions. He has to know about the complaints." Jasmine sat beside me, her expression serious. "Then we use that. If he won't respond to you as his daughter, maybe he'll respond to you as a tenant with evidence of negligence. You think I should threaten my own father with legal action? I think you should hold him accountable just like you would any other negligent property owner," she replied. "Family doesn't get a pass on endangering people." I tried calling my father again the next day and the day after that. Each time, my call went unanswered. I sent emails with some of the photographs attached but received no response. Either he was deliberately ignoring me, or someone was making sure my messages never reached him. Meanwhile, the city inspector finally visited the building. Unlike the previous inspection, this one was thorough, guided by our detailed documentation. The inspector, a woman named Sandra Willis, spent hours examining the property, taking her own photographs and measurements. "I've seen bad conditions before," she told me quietly as she was leaving, "but this level of neglect is criminal. You'll be hearing from us very soon." 3 days later, Westlake Properties received a notice of violation from the city, citing 37 separate code infractions and ordering immediate repairs to the electrical system and fire safety equipment. The notice included a tight deadline and the threat of daily fines for non-compliance. The management company's response was to send contractors to make the most visible repairs while ignoring the underlying issues. They installed new smoke detectors, but didn't fix the faulty wiring that had caused the original ones to fail. They patched leaking pipes, but didn't address the water damage in walls and ceilings. "They're just putting bandages on broken bones," Elena observed, as we watched the contractors rush through superficial repairs in the hallways. I tried one more time to reach my father this time, sending a certified letter to his office with copies of the city's violations notice and my photographs. The letter was returned unopened, marked, "Refused by recipient." The final confirmation of my suspicions came from an unexpected source. A junior employee at my father's company, someone I had met at a rare family gathering years earlier, contacted me through social media. "Your father knows about the Westlake situation," he wrote. "The management company has been sending monthly reports directly to him for the past year. They've been cutting corners to maximize profits before selling the building to developers. I thought you should know." He included screenshots of emails that confirmed everything my father had been receiving, detailed reports about the building's deteriorating conditions, tenant complaints, and the strategies used to minimize repair costs. One email specifically mentioned R. Montgomery's daughter as a resident becoming problematic with her documentation efforts. The betrayal cut deep, but it also clarified what I needed to do next. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every resident whose safety was being compromised by corporate greed, including my father's. The time for private appeals was over. Now we needed public pressure and legal action. What I didn't know then was that events were about to accelerate beyond anyone's control, bringing the situation to a crisis point in the most dangerous way possible. The third weekend of February, I traveled to Portland for a photography assignment. A local magazine had hired me to capture images of the city's emerging craft distillery scene, a 2-day job that would pay enough to cover my next month's rent. Jasmine had planned to stay with her boyfriend Michael that weekend, so our apartment would be empty. The weather in Portland was unusually cold, with a biting wind that made outdoor photography challenging. By Saturday evening, my fingers were numb from adjusting camera settings in the winter air, and I was looking forward to returning to my hotel room for a hot shower and room service. Just as I was packing up my equipment after the final shoot, my phone buzzed with texts from Elena. Power surging again in building. Really bad this time. Lights flickering, appliances turning on divided by off. Then called emergency maintenance. No answer as usual. And finally, several of us reporting burning smell near electrical room. Stay away from your apartment tonight if possible. I immediately called Elena, my concern mounting. "Have you called the fire department?" I asked as soon as she answered. "Not yet," she replied, her voice tense. "Patrick showed up and is insisting it's just a minor issue with the grid affecting the whole neighborhood. He's threatening to fine anyone who calls emergency services for a false alarm." That's ridiculous. If multiple people smell smoke, call the fire department. I don't care what Patrick says. Marcus is going to call. He's a teacher, so Patrick can't intimidate him as easily as some of the younger residents. I ended the call with Elena and immediately tried reaching Jasmine to confirm she was safely at Michael's apartment. When she didn't answer, I left a voicemail explaining the situation and asking her to call me back. Then I called the airlines to see if I could get an earlier flight back to Seattle in the morning. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of worry. I kept checking my phone for updates from Elena or other neighbors but heard nothing more. Around 11, I finally forced myself to try to sleep, setting my alarm for 5 a.m. to catch the earliest flight back to Seattle. At exactly 2:17 a.m., my phone rang, jolting me from a restless sleep. My father's name illuminated the screen. We hadn't spoken in months, not since my attempted calls about the building. Why would he be calling in the middle of the night? "Dad," I answered, immediately alert. "Ariana." His voice was calm, clinical, the same tone he used for business calls. "I've just been informed that your apartment building is on fire. Significant damage to the east wing. Hope you have good insurance." For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. Fire, building, insurance. The words floated disconnected in my mind. "What? How do you know this?" I finally managed. "I'm on the investor notification list. Emergency alerts for property damage." Still that detached, businesslike tone. No question about my safety, no concern about whether I might have been trapped in a burning building. And then, to my own surprise, I started laughing. Not nervous giggles, but full, incredulous laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. "Why are you laughing?" My father sounded genuinely confused. "This is a serious situation, Ariana. People could be hurt." "That's exactly why I'm laughing, Dad. I said, my laughter subsiding into something harder, colder. You call to tell me my home is on fire and your first concern is my insurance policy, not whether I'm alive or dead. Of course, I assumed you were fine, since you answered your phone, he said defensively. I was being practical. Property can be replaced, but you need proper documentation for insurance claims. I'm in Portland, I said flatly. For work. And Jasmine is at her boyfriend's place. So we're both safe, not that you asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, that's fortunate, he finally said. Is it, or is it fortunate for you, that the building caught fire when many residents were away for the weekend? Less chance of injuries or deaths to complicate the insurance claim. What are you implying, Ariana? His voice had taken on the warning tone I remembered from childhood, the one that signaled I was crossing a line. I'm not implying anything. I'm just finding it interesting that you knew about the fire before I did, before any of my neighbors could call me. Almost like you were waiting for something like this to happen. That's absurd. I received an automated alert as an investor. An investor who's been ignoring documented safety hazards for months, I countered. An investor who returned my certified letter without opening it, who never returned my calls about the dangerous conditions in a building he partially owns. The silence that followed told me more than any denial could have. I need to go, I said. I have to check on my neighbors and see what's left of my home. Ariana, wait. My father started, but I had already ended the call. My hands were shaking as I immediately called Elena, praying she would answer. After 4 rings, she picked up. Elena, are you okay? My father just called about a fire in the building. It's bad, Ariana, she said, her voice hoarse from smoke. It started in the electrical room, just like we warned them. Spread to the east wing within minutes. Fire department says the alarm system failed completely. No automatic alerts, no sprinklers. Is everyone out? Is anyone hurt? We're still accounting for everyone. No confirmed injuries yet, but some people haven't been located. The firefighters are still searching the building. My blood ran cold. Which units were hit worst? 3rd and 4th floors east side. Our apartment was on the 4th floor west side. Your unit has smoke and water damage, but the fire didn't reach it directly. I booked the earliest flight to Seattle while still on the phone with Elena, promising to be back as soon as humanly possible. As I threw my belongings into my suitcase, my phone buzzed again. Jasmine. Ari, I just heard. Are you okay? I'm in Portland, remember? Are you at Michael's? Yes, thank God. He lives on the west side of the city, nowhere near Westlake. Have you heard if everyone got out? Elena says they're still accounting for everyone. The fire started in the electrical room, just where we documented all those code violations. I knew this would happen, Jasmine said, her voice cracking. We all knew. We reported it over and over. And they ignored us over and over, I finished. But not anymore. This time they can't ignore the evidence of their negligence. As I waited for my flight at the Portland airport, scrolling through news reports about the fire and messages from neighbors, I thought about my father's call. Not a call of concern from a parent to a child, but a clinical notification from a property investor. It crystallized everything I had felt about our relationship for years. To him, I was just another asset to be managed, another property in his portfolio. But if he thought I would quietly file an insurance claim and move on, he had severely underestimated the woman I had become. The woman he had never bothered to know. My flight landed in Seattle at 8:45 a.m., and I took a rideshare straight to Westlake Apartments. From 3 blocks away, I could see the police barricades and fire trucks still surrounding the building. Black smoke stains licked up the east side exterior wall like dark fingers, and shattered windows gaped open to the morning air. Residents huddled in small groups on the sidewalk across from the building, many still in pajamas or hastily grabbed clothes, some wrapped in Red Cross blankets. I spotted Elena and Marcus near a coffee cart that someone had thoughtfully brought to provide free drinks to the displaced residents. Ariana, Elena called when she saw me rushing over to hug me tightly. Her normally immaculate clothes were smoke-stained, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. You made it back. How bad is it? Have they let anyone back in yet? Marcus joined us, coffee in hand. Not yet. Fire Marshal is still assessing structural safety. They're saying it could be days before anyone can retrieve belongings from the undamaged units. Is everyone accounted for now? I asked, dreading the answer. Yes, thankfully, Elena replied. 2 residents were treated for smoke inhalation but released from the hospital this morning. It could have been so much worse if it had happened later at night when more people were sleeping. I scanned the crowd of residents, recognizing faces from our tenant meetings. Where's Patrick or any representatives from Westlake Properties? Conspicuously absent, Marcus said bitterly. No one from management has shown up yet, not even to provide information about temporary housing or next steps. A firefighter was speaking to a small group near the barricade. I approached, introducing myself as a resident. Can you tell us what caused the fire? I asked. Preliminary findings point to an electrical system failure, he replied. Specifically outdated wiring that couldn't handle the building's power load. We found evidence of multiple, smaller electrical fires that had occurred previously and been patched over instead of properly repaired. Exactly what we had documented and reported, I thought grimly. Were the smoke detectors and sprinkler systems working? The sprinkler system was inactive due to a shutoff valve that appears to have been closed during a plumbing repair months ago and never reopened. As for the smoke detectors, he shook his head. Many were non-functional or missing batteries. The main alarm system had been disabled, possibly during an attempted repair. Criminal negligence clear as day. I thanked the firefighter and rejoined Elena and Marcus, relaying what I'd learned. We need to get everyone together, I said. All the residents. We need to share information and figure out next steps as a group. Word spread quickly, and within an hour, nearly 40 residents had gathered in a nearby park. People shared what they knew, what they had seen, what they had lost. Stories of warning signs ignored, of maintenance requests dismissed, of fears dismissed as exaggeration. I have something to tell all of you, I said when the initial discussions had quieted. I've been documenting the building's conditions for months, as many of you know. What you may not know is that I recently discovered Westlake Properties is partially owned by Montgomery Investments. I paused, steeling myself, which is my father's company. Murmurs ran through the group. Some looked confused, others angry. I didn't know about the connection when I moved in, I continued. When I discovered it, I tried repeatedly to contact my father about the dangerous conditions. He ignored all my attempts at communication. Last night, he called to inform me about the fire before any of you could reach me, not out of concern for my safety, but because he received an investor notification. So your father knew the building was a fire trap, someone called out. Based on the evidence I've gathered, yes. He received regular reports about the building's conditions and the decisions to defer critical repairs. A tense silence followed. I understood their anger, part of me shared it, but I also saw an opportunity. I believe we can use this connection to fight for proper compensation and accountability, I said. I have documentation that proves the owners knew about the dangers and chose to ignore them. I'm willing to share everything I have if you'll join me in demanding justice. By mid-afternoon, our impromptu gathering had evolved into an organized response. We formed committees for media communication, legal research, temporary housing coordination, and evidence collection. A local reporter who had been covering the fire approached our group, intrigued by the crowd of residents clearly working together rather than dispersing to find individual solutions. Melissa Chen, Seattle Tribune. She introduced herself, notepad in hand. I'm covering the Westlake fire. Would any of you be willing to share your experiences? I stepped forward. My name is Ariana Montgomery. I lived in apartment 416 and have been documenting the building's dangerous conditions for the past 6 months. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Montgomery. Any relation to Robert Montgomery of Montgomery Investments? He's my father, I confirmed, and his company is a partial owner of the building. The story took on new dimensions with that revelation. Melissa interviewed several residents, photographed my documentation, and promised a feature article in the next day's paper. Before she left, she handed me her card. If you have any other information about the ownership or management decisions, call me directly. This story has real potential to create change. That evening, as residents dispersed to hotels, friends' homes, and emergency housing provided by the Red Cross, I stayed behind with Elena, Jasmine, and Marcus to continue organizing our response. We set up a temporary headquarters at a coffee shop whose owner, sympathetic to our cause, allowed us to stay past closing hours. We need legal representation, Marcus pointed out. Individual insurance claims won't address the negligence aspect. I have a friend from college who works for a public interest law firm I offered. She handles housing rights cases. I'll call her tonight. Jasmine was scrolling through her phone. Guys, look at this. Westlake Properties just issued a statement claiming the fire was caused by tenant misuse of electrical systems and unauthorized modifications to apartment wiring. They're trying to blame us, Elena exclaimed. That's outrageous. They're panicking, I said, which means we're already having an impact. Later that night, alone in a hotel room paid for with my emergency credit card, I called my law school friend Sarah Brennan. After explaining the situation, including my father's involvement, she agreed to meet with our resident group the next day. This is exactly the kind of case our firm takes on Ariana, she said. Corporations using their power to endanger vulnerable people for profit. I'll bring one of our senior partners who specializes in housing negligence. Before trying to sleep, I checked my email one last time and found a message from an unfamiliar address, j.parker@montgomeryinvestments.com. Miss Montgomery, I'm risking my job by contacting you, but after seeing the news about the Westlake fire, I can't stay silent. I've been an administrative assistant at Montgomery Investments for 2 years. During that time, I've processed numerous reports regarding Westlake Apartments. Attached are copies of emails showing your father has been receiving monthly updates about the building's deteriorating conditions for the past 18 months. These emails specifically detail decisions to postpone critical repairs to maximize profits before selling the building to developers. I also have records showing your certified letter was delivered to your father's office and that he instructed staff to return it unopened. I can't publicly come forward without losing my livelihood, but I believe you should have this information. Jennifer Parker. Attached were dozens of emails, spreadsheets, and reports. One document particularly stood out, a cost-benefit analysis comparing the expense of bringing the building up to code versus the potential liability costs of accidents or fires. The analysis coldly concluded that the financially optimal strategy was to make minimal cosmetic repairs while preparing to sell the property to developers who plan to demolish the building anyway. Another email dated just 3 weeks earlier specifically mentioned me by name. R. Montgomery. Your daughter continues to document code violations and organize residents. Legal advises keeping her at arm's length to avoid appearance of conflict of interest. Recommend no direct communication regarding Westlake until property is divested. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed staring at my laptop screen as the evidence of calculated negligence accumulated before my eyes. The depth of betrayal was staggering. My own father had not only ignored dangerous conditions in a building where I lived, but had actively participated in a strategy to avoid addressing those dangers even when he knew I was potentially at risk. In that moment, any remaining hope of reconciliation with my father evaporated. This wasn't just about our broken relationship anymore. It was about justice for everyone whose home and safety had been sacrificed for corporate profit. My father had made his choice. Now I would make mine. The next morning, Melissa's article appeared on the front page of the Seattle Tribune Family Connection in Westlake Fire Property Owner's Daughter Among Displaced Residents. The story detailed the months of documented safety concerns, the management company's persistent neglect, and the revelation of Montgomery Investments' ownership stake. My father's company's involvement transformed what might have been a local housing story into a dramatic human interest piece that quickly gained traction across local news outlets. By noon, we had gathered 37 residents at a community center near the burnt building. Sarah Brennan and her senior colleague, James Wilson, listened as resident after resident shared their experiences of neglect and dismissal by the management company. Based on what I'm hearing and the documentation Ariana has provided, Wilson said after the testimonies concluded, we have a strong case for negligence against both Westlake Properties and Montgomery Investments. The evidence suggests they knew about dangerous conditions and deliberately chose not to address them. What can we realistically expect to achieve? Elena asked. Compensation for all your losses, certainly, Wilson replied. But beyond that, we can push for punitive damages based on the willful nature of their neglect. We can also file for emergency housing assistance from the court paid for by the property owners. I want them to fix the building properly, said Taylor, the nurse, who had repeatedly reported the chirping fire alarms, not just for us but for whoever lives there next. Wilson nodded. That's absolutely something we can demand as part of any settlement. The meeting transformed our loose coalition into an organized legal action. By the end of the day, 32 residents had signed on as plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit against Westlake Properties and Montgomery Investments. Sarah pulled me aside after the paperwork was signed. Ariana, you should prepare yourself. Your involvement makes this case particularly newsworthy, but it also puts you in a difficult position personally. Are you ready to publicly stand against your father's company? I've been standing against my father's values my entire adult life, I replied. This is just making it official. The lawsuit filing made the evening news with several stations running footage of the fire alongside interviews with residents. My phone rang just after the 6 o'clock broadcast ended. My father... Ariana, he said when I answered, his voice tense. We need to talk. I've been trying to talk to you for months, I replied coldly. This lawsuit is a mistake. You're allowing yourself to be manipulated by opportunistic lawyers and angry tenants. There are proper channels for addressing property damages. Proper channels, I repeated incredulously. Like the dozens of maintenance requests that were ignored, the certified letters that were returned unopened, the city inspector reports that resulted in cosmetic fixes. Those channels? You're making this personal when it's just business, he insisted. Properties have issues, systems fail. That's why people carry insurance. People died in fires like this one, Dad. We were lucky this time, but your business could have killed me or any of my neighbors. How is that not personal? He sighed, a sound I recognized from childhood, the exasperated response to what he perceived as unnecessary emotion. Look, I want to resolve this reasonably. Why don't you come to my office tomorrow? We can discuss a fair settlement for you personally. For me personally, I echoed. What about everyone else? I'm offering to help you, Ariana. The other tenants have their own resources. I'll come to your office, I said after a moment, but not to discuss a personal settlement. I'll come as a representative of all the Westlake residents. There was a long pause. Fine, 10 a.m. tomorrow. I immediately called Sarah after hanging up. My father wants me to come to his office tomorrow. He's floating the idea of a personal settlement. Classic divide and conquer, she replied. Are you going? Yes, but not to accept any offers. I want to look him in the eye when I tell him exactly what his negligence has cost us. And I want to record the conversation as evidence. Washington is a two-party consent state for recordings, Sarah cautioned. He would have to agree to be recorded. Then I'll bring a witness. Can you come with me? Absolutely, and we'll take detailed notes. The next morning, Sarah and I arrived at the Montgomery Investments office in downtown Seattle at precisely 10 a.m. The sleek, glass-fronted building embodied my father's business philosophy, impressive on the surface, with any flaws carefully concealed behind a polished exterior. My father's assistant, a young man I didn't recognize, looked uncomfortable as he led us to the conference room rather than my father's private office. Mr. Montgomery will be with you shortly, he said, avoiding eye contact. 20 minutes later, my father strode in, followed by a man I assumed was his lawyer. Both wore expensive suits and expressions of professional detachment. Ariana, my father acknowledged me with a nod, then glanced at Sarah. I wasn't expecting you to bring counsel. This is Sarah Brennan, I introduced her. She's representing the Westlake residents. I see. He gestured to the man beside him. This is Howard Geller, our general counsel. We all sat down the wide conference table, creating a symbolic divide between us. My father wasted no time on pleasantries. I've prepared a settlement offer for you, he began, sliding a folder across the table. It includes funds for a new apartment replacement of personal belongings and additional compensation for your inconvenience. I didn't touch the folder. What about the other residents? Westlake Properties will handle their claims through standard insurance processes. Insurance won't cover the negligence aspect, Sarah pointed out, or the fact that management knew about dangerous conditions and deliberately ignored them. My father's expression hardened. Those are allegations, not facts. Actually, I said, removing a stack of printed emails from my bag, they are facts, documented facts. Emails showing that you personally received reports about the dangerous conditions at Westlake and chose to defer repairs. The color drained slightly from my father's face as he realized what I was holding. Where did you get those? Does it matter? What matters is that you knew the building was unsafe. You knew I lived there. You knew residents were complaining. And you deliberately chose to do nothing because it was more profitable to let the building deteriorate. Howard Geller leaned forward. Miss Montgomery, any internal documents you may have obtained improperly would be inadmissible in court. Perhaps Sarah interjected, but the building inspector's reports, the residents' maintenance requests, the city violation notices, and the fire marshal's preliminary findings would all be admissible. And they tell the same story as these emails. My father had been staring at the emails on the table, but now he looked up at me, his expression unreadable. What do you want, Ariana? I want what all the residents want. Full compensation for everything we've lost. Proper repairs to make the building safe. Temporary housing until those repairs are complete. And accountability for the negligence that caused the fire. That's not reasonable, he began. No, what's not reasonable is expecting people to live in dangerous conditions so you can maximize your profit margin. I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. What's not reasonable is ignoring safety hazards until they literally catch fire. What's not reasonable is calling your daughter to ask about her insurance policy instead of her safety when her home burns down. The conference room fell silent. Even Howard Geller looked uncomfortable. You've never understood business, Ariana, my father finally said. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. This wasn't a difficult decision, Dad. This was the easy way out. The difficult decision would have been doing the right thing even if it cost more. I stood up, gathering my documents. We're not accepting your personal settlement offer. Either you come to the table with a fair proposal for all the residents, or we'll see you in court. And everything I have will become public record. My father's jaw tightened. You'd do that to your own family. You did this to your own family, I corrected him. The moment you decided your profit margin was more important than my safety, you made this choice inevitable. As Sarah and I turned to leave, my father called after me. Ariana, wait. Let's discuss this further. I paused at the door. I've been waiting for you to discuss things that matter for my entire life, Dad. I'm done waiting. The next time we talk, it will be with all the residents present or through our attorneys in court. Walking out of my father's office that day was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but also one of the most liberating. For the first time, I had confronted him, not as a disappointed daughter seeking approval, but as an equal standing firm in my convictions. The weight of seeking his recognition had lifted, replaced by the strength of knowing I was fighting for something larger than our relationship. Outside the building, Sarah squeezed my arm. You did well in there. Really well. Do you think it will make a difference? Based on his reaction to those emails, absolutely. He knows he's vulnerable legally and publicly. His best option now is to settle quickly and quietly. She was right. 3 days later, Howard Geller contacted Sarah with a substantially revised settlement offer. The negotiations continued for 2 weeks, with each version coming closer to meeting our demands. The final agreement included full compensation for all residents' losses, 6 months of paid temporary housing, complete renovation of the building, to exceed current safety codes, right of return for all residents at their previous rental rates, and a significant punitive damages payment to be divided among the plaintiffs. The agreement also included a confidentiality clause, but it only applied to the financial details, not to the facts of the case. The negligence and the cover-up could still be discussed publicly, ensuring that Montgomery Investments and Westlake Properties would face the reputational consequences of their actions. When I shared the settlement terms with the other residents, the response was overwhelmingly positive. For many, it represented not just financial compensation, but validation of their experiences and a restoration of dignity that had been denied them for so long. You did this, Ariana Elena told me during our celebration gathering. Your documentation, your connection, your courage to stand up to your father, you made this happen. But I knew it wasn't just me. It was all of us working together, refusing to be silenced or dismissed. In finding my voice against my father, I had helped others find theirs as well. And that felt like a victory greater than any settlement amount could reflect. 6 months after the fire, the Westlake apartments had been transformed, not just repaired but renovated to exceed every safety code standard. New wiring, modern plumbing, enhanced fire suppression systems, and improved structural supports had turned the once dangerous building into a model of urban housing safety. The settlement funds had provided each resident with enough money to replace their lost belongings and cover temporary housing costs while the renovations were completed. For many, it also included additional compensation that allowed them to pursue dreams they had previously set aside due to financial constraints. I used my portion of the settlement to open my own photography studio in a small storefront near the renovated Westlake building. After years of working from my apartment and taking whatever freelance jobs came my way, I finally had a professional space devoted entirely to my art. I named it Phoenix Studios, a nod to rising from the ashes of the fire that had changed everything. The studio opening attracted local media attention partly due to my connection to the Westlake case, which had become something of a landmark in Seattle's housing rights movement. Melissa from the Seattle Tribune attended, now working on a long-form piece about housing negligence in the city. "Your story sparked something important," she told me, as she photographed the new space for her article. Since the Westlake settlement, 3 other apartment buildings owned by different companies have been proactively renovated to address safety concerns. Owners are realizing that neglect isn't profitable anymore. The publicity surrounding the case had indeed created ripples beyond our immediate situation. The City Housing Authority had implemented stricter inspection protocols and higher penalties for code violations. Tenant advocacy groups had used our documentation methods as a template for other residents facing similar issues. And Montgomery Investments, under increased scrutiny, had divested from several other problematic properties and hired a new compliance officer to oversee building safety across their portfolio. As for my father, our confrontation had fundamentally altered our relationship, though not in the way I might have expected. 2 months after the settlement, he asked to meet me for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. "I want to apologize," he said, as soon as we sat down, the words clearly difficult for him to say. "Not just for Westlake, though, especially for that, but for all of it, for not being the father you deserved." I remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop for the qualification that would turn his apology into another business transaction. "I've been seeing a therapist," he continued, surprising me further. "Started after the lawsuit. She's helping me understand how my approach to life, to business, to relationships has been fundamentally flawed." "One therapy session doesn't fix decades of emotional neglect," I pointed out, not ready to offer forgiveness just yet. I know that he acknowledged. "This isn't about asking for your forgiveness. It's about telling you that you were right, about all of it. The choices I made, the priorities I set, they were wrong. And seeing you stand up to me, seeing you fight for what was right regardless of the cost, it forced me to confront that in a way I couldn't ignore." We talked for nearly 2 hours that day, more honestly than we ever had before. He didn't make excuses for his actions or try to justify the decisions that had led to the fire. Instead, he listened as I explained how his emotional absence had shaped my childhood, how his attempts to solve problems with money, rather than presence, had taught me to expect less from relationships, how I had built walls to protect myself from the disappointment he consistently delivered. That conversation didn't instantly heal our relationship, but it opened a door that had been firmly closed for years. We began meeting monthly, cautiously rebuilding a connection based on honesty rather than obligation. Sometimes our conversations were painful, sometimes productive, but they were always real, which was more than we had ever had before. Meanwhile, my life continued to evolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. Phoenix Studios quickly gained a reputation for powerful documentary photography, and I found myself specializing in visual storytelling for social justice causes. The skills I had developed documenting the Westlake building's deterioration now served me in projects highlighting housing inequality, environmental justice, and community resilience. My circle of friends expanded through these projects, but the core group from Westlake remained central to my life. Elena, Jasmine, Marcus, and Taylor had become a chosen family forged in the crucible of our shared experience. We celebrated each other's victories, supported each other through challenges, and maintained the solidarity that had carried us through the darkest days after the fire. 1 year to the day after the fire, we held a reunion gathering at the renovated Westlake building. Nearly all the original residents had exercised their right to return, and the building's community room, now a bright, welcoming space, was filled with people whose lives had intertwined through crisis and recovery. "I never thought I'd say this," Elena remarked as we shared drinks and memories. "But in some ways, that fire was the best thing that could have happened. Not the fire itself, obviously, but what came after. The way we all came together, the changes we created." From trauma to transformation, Marcus agreed. "But let's not romanticize it too much. We should never have had to go through that to get basic safety and dignity in our homes." "True," I acknowledged. "But there's power in knowing that when systems fail us, we can still find strength in each other. That's the real insurance policy, isn't it? Not some document from a company, but the community we build around us." Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, I found myself on the rooftop terrace that had been added during the renovations. The Seattle skyline sparkled around me, a canvas of light against the night sky. I thought about the journey of the past year, about everything that had been lost and found in the wake of that middle-of-the-night phone call. The fire had destroyed possessions, yes, but it had also burned away pretenses and evasions. It had revealed the true foundations of my relationship with my father, but also the solid ground of friendships I had built on my own terms. It had shown me that sometimes security isn't about having insurance or financial safety nets, but about having the courage to stand up for what's right and the wisdom to know who really has your back when crisis comes. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Saw the piece about Phoenix Studios in the Business Journal. Proud of what you're building. No strings attached." A simple message, but one that would have been unimaginable before the fire forced us both to confront painful truths. Our relationship would never be perfect, but it had evolved into something authentic, and that was its own kind of victory. As I looked out over the city lights, I thought about all the people living in buildings like Westlake once was facing negligence and danger behind painted-over problems. And I thought about the power one voice could have when it refused to be silenced, especially when joined by other voices equally determined to be heard. The most valuable thing to rise from the ashes of that fire wasn't my studio or the settlement money or even the renovated building. It was the knowledge that true security doesn't come from insurance policies or financial stability, but from finding your voice, standing your ground, and building community with those who value safety and dignity as much as you do. Some foundations are made of concrete and steel. Others are built from courage, truth, and solidarity. The fire had destroyed the first kind, but in doing so had allowed me to build the second, stronger kind. And that was a foundation that no fire could ever burn away. Have you ever had to stand up to someone close to you for something you believed in? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about finding strength in difficult situations. And share this with anyone who might need a reminder that sometimes the greatest power comes not from having all the answers, but from asking the right questions and standing firm in your truth. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes our greatest challenges reveal our deepest strengths.